What's going on, guys? Derek here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, doing mock drafts on Sleeper and figure it's best for us to go over some of the top fantasy options that you'll be considering with your first overall pick. We'll break them down. It's going to come down to about 4 running backs, but we'll go into each one of their situations. We'll let you guys know what we think and who we think should be drafted first. Before we do get into that, though, let's head over to the stat of the day. So today's winner was Drake Anthony, and the question was, since 2006, there have been just 2 wide receivers with 18 or more drops in a single season. Name just one of them. The correct answer was either Amari Cooper or Braylon Edwards. Drake Anthony, you knocked it out of the park, so congratulations, you got this one right first. As for today's stat of the day, we're sticking with the same timeline since 2006, except this time we're moving to tight ends. So there have been 3 tight ends with 10 plus touchdowns on 50 or fewer receptions. You gotta name 2 of the 3, okay? So 3 tight ends that have had 10 plus touchdowns on 50 or fewer receptions. Name 2. Okay, so I'm going to leave my notes up here and kind of go through these players on the Sleeper app. I've been using the Sleeper app while I've been going through my research, and right now I just opened this new community group, but I haven't really added anything to it. Right now all there is my notes, so if you guys want to join, you're totally more than welcome to, but there's going to be more stuff I'm going to add in here as we go through the rest of the offseason. But let's start with Saquon Barkley. So as we all know, he finished first in fantasy points. He had 385.9, which is massive. Comes out to about 24.1 points per game. And just for reference, that would be the equivalent of finishing as the quarterback too. So his point totals were massive. Not only were his point totals massive, he did it pretty flashy. He had 54 attempts that went for 10 or more yards, and he even had a 20 plus yard gain in about 12 of 16 games. So 3 out of 4 games, you know he was getting a big play, and he's a monster at that. But there are some key differences as we head into this year that weren't there last year. So the big parts were about Eli Manning and them drafting a quarterback. Daniel Jones was taken with the 6th overall pick. We all know that. But Odell Beckham Jr. also is traded to the Cleveland Browns. So we have question marks at quarterback. We have a lack of strong weapons at the receiver position. They have Sterling Shepard and Evan Engram, who are both great on their own. Don't get me wrong. They added Golden Tate as well. But when you lose Odell Beckham, it has to hurt. I don't want to jump too far into Odell yet. Let's start with Eli and Daniel Jones. And I know with Eli playing so poorly, the first thought is it can't be a significant downgrade to go from Eli to Daniel Jones. But I think that fact is a little bit overstated because think of it this way. If any rookie were to finish with Eli Manning's stats that he had last year, it would be considered one of the best rookie seasons of all time. Right now, Andrew Luck holds the yardage record at about 4,300 yards. Eli Manning was right there. He had 4,299 yards, and Eli, he completed 66% of his passes. Luck that season completed 54%. So I know one of the big knocks on Eli, and for good reason, was he wasn't able to push the ball downfield, didn't take any risks. That's something that maybe Daniel Jones could improve upon if he were the lead quarterback in this system. But if you actually take a look at his skill set, Daniel Jones is known to be taking the safer options. And part of the reason why they targeted Daniel Jones was because he mirrored a lot of the same skill sets that Eli Manning has. So to just assume that he's going to, in year 1, take a step, become the starter, and to be a massive improvement, we can't reasonably say that at this point. So we can't say that it could increase Barkley's fantasy value. So for that reason, it has to be calculated as a risk. Now moving over to Beckham, he played 12 of 16 games last season, and truth be told, the offense didn't really sputter while he was out. They did get shut out by Tennessee, completely shut out, 0 points. But in the other 3 games, this offense was able to average 34 points per game. Any offense averaging 34 points per game, that's going to be plenty of opportunity for your running back to score. The only problem with that is that he faced stack boxes on 34% of his snaps. And if that was the case for all 16 games, he would have faced the 5th most stack boxes out of any running back in the league over 100 attempts. The other 12 games of the season, he only faced stack boxes on about 19% of plays, which comes out to about league average. So clearly we can see a significant increase in the amount of stack boxes, which also has to be calculated as a risk. What you're getting with Barkley, though, is quite possibly the most talented running back in the league. He's going to get an insane amount of targets, which basically means his floor is higher. So even if the boxes do get stacked on him, I wouldn't worry too much about at least his floor. And then if we're talking ceiling, if everything goes right for any of the running backs that we're talking about, Saquon Barkley alone has to have the most upside because he has the most home run potential out of any of the running backs that I think in the entire league. Alvin Kamara, he can break him away, don't get me wrong, but Saquon Barkley is no stranger to going 50, 60 yards to the house, and it's something we're going to continue to see in 2019. Needless to say, though, he is in contention for first overall pick, but before we make that determination, let's head over to Ezekiel Elliott. If you guys haven't heard by now, Zeke has some off-field stuff going on. He shoved somebody, it's on video, and that could potentially result in a suspension. He does have a history with off-field issues. If you're asking me, I don't think it looks suspension-worthy, but it's something to monitor. For the sake of this video, we are going to assume that he is available, and we've heard that no further action is being taken by the NFL. With that out of the way, let's talk some fantasy. So he has 40 career games, over 4,000 yards, and an average of 4.7 yards per carry. Needless to say, this dude is a monster on the ground. He led the league in rushing last year. He's likely going to be the favorite to lead the league in rushing again this year. In the fantasy space, he finished 5th among all running backs, but you have to keep in mind he only played in 15 games, and if you're taking points per game, he averaged 21.9. And a real positive to take from last season was his utilization in the passing game. Not only was he seeing the targets and getting the receptions, but just to see how well he was performing in the passing game, he caught 77 of 95 targets, which is 81% catch rate. That is a very, very good catch rate. Compare that to Barkley's 74%, Kamara's 77%, and Christian McCaffrey's 86%. These are players we knew were solid pass catchers, and for somebody like Zeke, who we weren't 100% sold on as a pass catcher, to come and perform in this way, you know 100% they're going to continue to use this skill set that he has, and it's very likely that he could even see more targets this year. So if you ask me, 2019, he has more of a case than ever to be taken with the first overall pick. Previously, the lack of receptions that we were seeing did give him a knockdown compared to some of the other players in his range. But that's not the only reason to get excited about Zeke this year. He only had 9 touchdowns last year, and for those of you, you're like, how is that a positive? Well, think of it this way. The dude had a crazy amount of yards. I'm talking over 2,000. And if you're having 2,000 yards and you're only scoring 9 touchdowns, that is an outlier. Just look back at 2017, where he scored 9 touchdowns as well, but he only played in 10 games. So for people sleeping on him because his per game averages weren't as high as they probably should have been, take that to your advantage and get a deal on Ezekiel Elliott. There's not too much that needs to be said further into him because unlike some of these other running backs, he doesn't have much changing about his situation, so what you see is what you're going to get. The big news is obviously Amari Cooper, who they had for 9 games last season. That helps him. Better offense, more scoring opportunities, and less stacked boxes. I remember playing in DraftKings all last season, and Dallas Cowboys defense was always bottom, always the cheapest, and I would just plug them in every week, and they were performing consistently. Not only that, they did not allow opposing teams to score a lot of points. It's not a secret. If you're up late in games, the running backs get more touches. All good news for Ezekiel Elliott. So he's locked and loaded as a top pick. I would be surprised if he can't match what he did in fantasy last season or exceed it, because 16 full games with Amari Cooper, and tie that in with him getting more touchdowns, sort of returning to the mean. And I would be surprised if he doesn't at least mirror that 21.9 points per game that he finished with last season. So he's as safe as they come. Let's move over to the next guy, Christian McCaffrey. Now's a pretty good time to actually talk about the ADP as well. So Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, they're tied for first overall pick, followed by Ezekiel Elliott and Alvin Kamara. I did want to mention that because Christian McCaffrey has been the biggest riser in the past month, and for good reason. The dude's a stud. Many would probably be surprised to hear that he finished just 0.3 fantasy points away from Saquon Barkley. So yes, he's the RB2, 385.5 PPR points, an average of 24.1 points per game. The only difference is if you polled 100 people and you asked them who's their first overall pick, Christian McCaffrey's name just doesn't come to mind. It's not the first name that you think about. When you really dive into it though, it starts to all make sense and he starts to become a better pick the more and more that you research it. So I know Newton, he's kind of banged up right now, but the biggest benefit that Christian McCaffrey has right now is there's no signs that are pointing to any potential regression. He finished the season with 1,965 total yards. He cracked 1,000 rushing, add another 867 receiving. He led all running backs in total targets and put together a catch rate of 86%. That's incredible. And it's not like the NFL teams are going to all of a sudden have some film on him out of thin air. No, this is his third year, coming into his third year in the league. Teams have already had film on him. And if we're talking about low touchdowns, because we mentioned it for Zeke, well, 13 touchdowns is also not on the high end for a running back with that amount of yards. So to think that he was being carried in his production by the touchdowns is just not correct. If he finished next season with 18 touchdowns, while that would be on the high end, it still wouldn't surprise any of us. Not with 1,900 plus yards. This offense was a top 10 offense last season, and the type of player McCaffrey is, he can get those chunk plays, and he can get them consistently. In fact, he had 61 plays that went over 10 yards, which was actually higher than Barkley. Barkley obviously killed him when it came to the 20-plus yard type of plays, but still, he's getting these chunk plays, and it's really going to help his production. And another positive to say about McCaffrey was that even with the high workload, we did not see his body break down. He was producing consistently from the start of the season to the end of the season. He now has 2 full 16-game seasons under his belt, so we definitely got to give him credit for that. And also keep in mind one thing, he did hardly play in the final game of the season. He had like 5 total touches. So it is not out of the question for Christian McCaffrey to finish the season, this upcoming season, 2019, with that elusive 1,000 yard rushing, 1,000 yard receiving accolade that a lot of players are trying to chase, David Johnson specifically. I wouldn't be surprised myself. And PPR leagues, he's got to be one of the safer guys that you can pick. Remember, I said no clear signs of regression, potential for increased touchdowns, and while he was very efficient this year, the efficiency numbers didn't just jump out to us as an outlier, similarly to what they did with Alvin Kamara in his rookie year. So yes, all good signs for Christian McCaffrey, and the ADP really speaks for that. And speaking of Kamara, he's the last guy on the list that you could make a case for reasonably for going first overall. He finished last season as the RB3, 354 PPR points, an average of 23.6 points per game. He may not have been as hyper efficient as he was in his rookie season, but he still has a career average of 5.1 yards per carry, 9.5 yards per reception. So he's still in that Jamal Charles upper echelon. So if he can continue it, he could be one of the greater backs for quite some time. With that said though, would it surprise you guys if I told you that he has never ran for 1,000 yards in a single season? Some of you, I know you're smart, it wouldn't surprise you, but maybe it would also surprise you to hear that he only has 2 career games over 100 yards rushing. He makes up for that in the receiving game, and one thing he has going for him is that he is on the best offense of all the top 4 running backs. Plenty of scoring opportunities for Kamara as we head into this season, and he's no stranger to the end zone. Remember, he had 18 touchdowns last season, and in his career, he has 31, and he didn't even start the beginning of the 2017 season. So 31 touchdowns, that is insane, and it's a pace he can continue to push for. Just keep in mind that the touchdowns, they are fluky, and 18 is high no matter what player you are. So you can't expect 18 as a floor, but if he remains healthy, you know he's going to get double-digit touchdowns. I can guarantee you that. Just don't always put on the rose-colored lenses like a lot of people are doing this year because Mark Ingram left. He was a workhorse when there was no Mark Ingram for the first 4 games last season, but they just signed Latavius Murray. It's not in the best interest for the Saints to just increase his workload significantly. He may have a little bit of an increased workload, and that would be great, but to expect he's going to be a workhorse is just very unlikely, and it's not a good bet to take. And having a good offense could turn around to bite Alvin Kamara, because if the Saints do blow past some of these weaker teams and have a 2-score lead in the 4th quarter, there could be scenarios where we see Latavius Murray starting to get more and more touches, which is why Latavius Murray himself actually makes a decent fantasy pick based on his current ADP. We'll continue to touch more on him in a later video, but the good news is you don't need Kamara to increase his touches from last season to be worth the price. Okay, he's good, he's efficient, he scores, he's on a great offense. And if we're talking upside, let's talk about Latavius Murray. What happens if he does get injured? I think a good predictor of that, or a good example of that, was when Ingram was out for the first 4 games last season. In those types of situations, if Kamara was left to workhorse duties or actually got, quite a significant bump, he could be the best fantasy running back in all of football. In the 4 games without Ingram, he averaged 153 yards with 9 receptions per game. He also had 6 touchdowns through that span, and that equates out to over 33 fantasy points per game, which is massive. So there's a case for Alvin Kamara, don't get me wrong, but he's actually finishing 4th on this list. And then Zeke, he's going to be 3rd. Now Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey, it's going to come down to a matter of preference. As I was doing my research, I actually think I'm leaning Christian McCaffrey right now. Saquon Barkley, there's just a couple of factors that I don't think they're going to hinder him. I don't think it's going to knock him out of top 5. He's too special of a talent to be held up by, poor quarterback play. But we did see situations in the past with, let's say, Todd Gurley, where if the offense sputters and the coaching staff is unreliable, it can really hurt the running back position. And just Christian McCaffrey doesn't have any clear signs of regression. And the only reason Ezekiel Elliott did not make the list is just because the amount of receptions that both Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey are going to get this season way outweigh what Zeke will get, even if Zeke does see an increased target share this upcoming season. If we're talking standard, though, it's Zeke all the way for me. So for PPR, I'm going Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara. Would I be surprised if any of these 4 running backs finishes 1st overall? Not at all. They're all great. we can make a case for any one of them. That's what separated these four from the remaining running backs behind them. It was super easy to make a case for them. If I was tasked to have to debate on why any one of these four players would be the first overall pick or should be the first overall pick, I could do it with ease. The other guys, not so much. But with that being said, guys, that's it for this video. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.